Okay, so now it's my pleasure now to ask Ray Woods to give his perspective on trends in the Welsh flora. If we all know, Ray worked for Nature Conservancy Council and its many guises since 1973, eventually managing a team responsible for exercise, natural reserves, farm conservation schemes, etc. in East Wales. He's also a lichenologist, worked for plant life on lower plants, and
6 years with that lad. A cold face, struggling along. Thanks very much indeed. Well, it's a huge pleasure to be here in front of you. God knows why I get selected for these rather difficult tasks. But it's such a pleasure because this is such an amazing amount of information that we've all pulled together. I mean, how many million records did it say? 80 billion was it? And 8,500 recorders. There ain't nowhere in the world that comes close to this. I think last Saturday afternoon, I was involved in a Zoom conference, a symposium, looking at red data books on lichens. And as the afternoon wore on, I got more and more distressed and bothered. And there were accounts of failures to make really any serious progress in Switzerland, for God's sake. Spain was struggling. Colombia was struggling. All of them were struggling by the very fact that they hadn't even got the basic information. Let's just look at the Swiss example. Well, the Swiss example, they managed to get enough money to employ 5 people for 6 years. And they decided they could only cope with the lichens that live on the bark of living trees. So then they decided, well, we better have some statistically significant analysis. So they then selected randomly, they divided up Switzerland into different geographic zones, and then they randomly selected points in those zones. And they sent these 4 lichenologists out to find that point and then record all the lichens present on all the trees in, I think it was 12.5 meters out, so it's 25 meters IR square, whatever, you know. Anyway, so that was a good start. And then they thought, well, of course, the trouble is a lot of the species we're really interested in for red data states are obviously very scarce. And of course, I mean, how many squares would you want to do, you know, in order to ensure that, you know, you actually found some of these? So they decided they'd allow them free to roam in several 10-kilometre squares looking for good quality habitat. Anyway, the upshot of it was when they came back, they discovered that after all that work, they'd still only found barely half of all the lichens that were known to exist on trees in Switzerland. And had really hardly found any that were supposedly rare or uncommon, you know. And so they were effectively trying to do the job that you've done here. We've got this wonderful background now. We've got to make use of it though, move on quickly and capitalize on it. I mean, I got dragged in anyway in the middle of this symposium. I got so fed up that I couldn't understand the foreign accents. My hearing's not very good. I couldn't, and also they were coughing. All of them were suffering from some ghastly virus. And I struggled to understand. I started peeling the potatoes. You know, you can put a bowl down, can't you? You can't be seeing what you're doing. And then suddenly they wanted me to discuss this. They wanted me to help to come in on this because I've been one of the few people who's actually been responsible for coming up with red data listing, and then had to defend those listings all the way, in one case, to the High Court in public inquiries. You know, and so, you know, I'm delighted that that Trevor's magnum opus here, the vascular plant red data list of Wales, we've got that. But there's a big problem. 2008, right here, that was 25 years ago. Right, shall I be I shall be the barrister for the developer here. Well, Mr. Woods, this is very interesting. So we're reliant on the threat statuses as outlined in this rather magnificent tome by Dr. Dines. Yes, Dr. Dines. Right. Seems to me it was produced a little while ago. Perhaps the inspector would like to know, well, how many new plant records have been made since 2008? 10? 100? Thousands? Oh, it's thousands, is it? So, so interesting. Thousands more records have been made since 2008, and yet no account seems to have been taken to all those thousands of records. So as far as I can see, Mr. Inspector, whilst it's a very erudite and no doubt in its day a very useful document, I think it's now historically interesting. And I think we can just put it one side. and at least we now have to assume that, well, the possibility exists that these plants that are on this development site might be of some significance. But on the other hand, they might not be. So you've got to get this up to date. It's got to be live. And okay, I've had terrible rows with my former employers because, of course, we've used these threat statuses to try and designate sites of special scientific interest. We've got thresholds for numbers. And of course, instability, this man who goes, instability, and Sam in particular, I mean, he hated the idea of me wanting to change the threat statuses for the lichens because we've got thresholds that had to be crossed, and then you had a necessary sign. I'd bugger up the thresholds by changing them. Is it then a necessary sign? Well, of course it's still a necessary sign, even though it may not have, because the threshold is a box ticking exercise. It's only underpinning it. It is not the be all and end all. The be all and end all is the experience of all of us that know about these things in this room, all collectively coming together and saying, yes, this is special, and okay, we consider as a result of the IUCN threat criteria, the Atlas records, that we could put it in this category, which we describe as vulnerable. And that scores 3 points, and if you have 19 points for a site, it then becomes an SSI. So it's all very artificial. But this is a really wonderful baseline underlying document which no inspector could fail to be impressed with. And from it, I think we do now need to look at where we're going. I'd love, for example, we've already mentioned, I love the overlays for the first edition of the Atlas. Please, can we have some nice overlays that I can lay on the maps? I know it's not going to be easy, but it would be nice. Wouldn't it be lovely? I look at some of the changes that seem to have taken place in Mid Wales. I look at all around me. I can't find fleabane, the common fleabane, Puricaria. That seems to have almost gone extinct in Radnorshire. I think definitely Northshire has gone extinct. That's gone extinct. Almost completely lost purple loosestrife. And I think if I was to plot the distribution of the density of sheep against the distribution of this species, I would find there was a negative correlation. The more sheep, the fewer of these records there are of these things. It'd be lovely to be able to do that. And we could do almost anything, couldn't we, now with our wonderful electronic gadgetry. So I think that is something I would love to see government funding us to do, to be able to begin to understand a lot more of these relationships. Yeah, there's other species of interest. Looking through, there were others which troubled me a little, because I thought to begin with I would ask a few random Vice County recorders for their views on which species might have declined. And I started on poor old John, and I got John to produce a list of some. I mean, one of the ones you turned up, it was a Jugo, wasn't it? Bugle. And I thought, well, I'll do the same for myself. And I thought, right, World Caraway, there we are. There's a species that must have declined. And John thinks that a Jugo has declined. We state in the Atlas that, of course, woodland species are becoming, the smaller ones are being squeezed out by the bigger ones now, the brambles, the eutrophication, and nettles. Doesn't seem to show up in the distribution maps at all. And it struck me that those species which achieve a certain degree of abundance within a particular area, you can lose huge numbers of sites for them, and they don't show up in the 10 kilometre square maps. So there were these other little things that we need to be aware of, that they didn't quite work like that. But at the same time, I think we could use this atlas now to create a traffic light system. I think the ornithologist traffic light system is, I think, if anything, slightly better than our very academic IUCN threat status led system. So, for example, we saw the wonderful illustration of harebell. Harebells declined. Yeah. If we look inside that great book on grasslands of Wales, produced by Natural Resources Wales, you will see that 97% of all lowland grassland in Wales has disappeared since 1900. The ornithologists say 50% decline since 1800. You shove it into the amber category. Can we not think that species like harebell should go into an amber category? Is red, amber, and green backed up by the much more erudite and careful consideration through all the IUCN threat criteria. And this has got to be kept up to date. So we need a standing committee, please, in Wales. Who's going to call it? Plant-life, the SBI, both, Botanic Garden, but it's got to be, because you know this is such a fundamental and useful basic data source, and from that I want to have a little click link at the bottom, which just leads me on to the up-to-date, kept up-to-date all the time, an account of the threat statuses for these things. Yeah, and I'd love to have a link that links me straight into the Aderyn maps for Wales, because we still haven't resolved the relationships between the SBI database and the local record centre databases. And I want a link, please, at the bottom I can just click on, so I can go straight into GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, and I can see the world distribution of it straight away. And then I can begin to start to make some sense to see that, okay, Wallenberg is to a penny where I live. Oh, world scale is one of my rarest plants. I should be looking after it. Like, you know, forget all my rarities. My 99% of all my Viscounty rarities, irrelevant. Wallenbergia, Ivy leaf crowfoot. Yeah, these are the things I should be really concentrating on, because I hold internationally significant population. I can find that just with one click of a button onto the GBIF site. Can we think about these as, you know, important possibilities for the future? Because this is such an amazing resource that we do need to build on. Like, is it possible for the maps to become live, so that as the new records come in? Sorry, drone fault for asking me to stop. Anyway, there we have it. I've said enough. But it's never been a better time. If you look now, I mean, in the last 12 months, I can't believe what notice Welsh Government has issued to things like the local authorities. I mean, we've got the deep dive. I hope you've all come across the deep dive. You just look at the deep dive. The 30-30 promises, that 30% of the landscape of Wales will be under conservation measures, you know, by 2030. Who's going to do that? It's got to be. I'm afraid we're the only people in the room today that have got the knowledge. Yeah. And so, and there's also now the latest, a letter was sent out to all the local authorities before, just before Christmas, saying, right, all development proposals in future not only will have to have neutral effects on the living world, they're going to have beneficial effects. They're going to be more. So the Andes of this world, I mean, God knows how you're going to keep up with it. But what are we going to say? What are we going to do? How are we going to improve the numbers of harebells? How are we going to increase the world caraway populations? How are we going to make sure that the Wallenbergia doesn't decline? And you know, this is the underlying fundamental data from which we can measure change and understand how successful we are. Thank you. Sorry.